Good morning.
Good morning.
So as you all know, we are well entrenched in the season of Lent, a time where many Christians commit to fasting or giving up certain luxuries in order to replicate the sacrifice of Jesus' journey in the desert for 40 days. So in that spirit, here's today's opening humor about giving something up. So a golfer is in a competitive match with a friend who is ahead by a couple of strokes. The golfer says to himself, "Oh, I'd give anything to sink this next putt." All of a sudden, a stranger walks up to him and whispers, "Would you give up a third of your sex life to make this putt?" The golfer thinks the man's a little crazy and that his answer will be meaningless, but perhaps it's a good omen and will put him in the right frame of mind to make the difficult putt. So he says, "Okay." And what do you know? He sinks the putt. 2 holes later, he mumbles to himself, "Boy, if I could only get an eagle on this hole." That same stranger moves to his side and said, "Would it be worth another third of your sex life to make that hole?" The golfer shrugs and says, "Sure." And he makes the eagle. Down to the final hole. The golfer needs a hole-in-one to win. Though he says nothing, the stranger moves to his side and said, "Would you be willing to give up the rest of your sex life to win this match?" The golfer says, "Certainly." And he makes the hole-in-one and wins the match. As the golfer walks back to the clubhouse, the stranger walks alongside and says, "You know, I've really not been very fair with you because you don't know who I am. I'm really the devil, and from now on, you'll have no sex life." "Nice to meet you," says the golfer. "My name's Father O'Malley."
Father O'Malley.
I guess you'd have to be a little Catholic to get that. All right, would you please pray with me? Oh, dear Creator God, may the words of my mouth and all the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
So let's start today's sermon by going back to our childhood and remembering some of the phrases or the taunts that were either used against us or we used against the other kids that we didn't like on the playground. There was the famous one, "Fatty, fatty, 2x4, can't get through the kitchen door." Or how about "Liar, liar, pants on fire, nose grows long as a telephone wire." "John and Susie sitting in a tree, Kissing. First comes love, and then comes marriage, then comes Susie with a baby carriage." "When you were born, you were so ugly that the doctor slapped your mother instead of you." "Femboy, tomboy, sissy pants, faggot." You know, I remember one poor girl, I think it was 5th or 6th grade, I don't remember exactly, but everyone called her Elsie the cow because she was overweight. And they used to yell "moo" at her every time she passed by. Now, Elsie the cow, for those of you that lived here in this area, was the mascot for the Borden Milk and Dairy Company way back then. I don't remember the girl's real name. I don't even remember what she really looked like. I mean, after all, it was like 50-some years ago. My brain can barely remember yesterday. But I do know that even at that age, I knew it was a particularly cruel thing to be doing to her. I don't remember ever calling her Elsie myself, but I certainly laughed, I think, when others did. You know, most of the taunts and the phrases that children use are based on some sort of ring of truth or reality, unfortunately, and that's what makes them so hurtful. Our appearance, our behaviors, our actions, or who we associate with bring on these taunts. And when we went home crying to our parents or to a teacher, what did they tell us? "Oh, just ignore those kids. They'll go away. Don't pay any attention to them. They're just being mean. Just remember, sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you." Well, excepting for those of us who were ever taunted or picked on, we know from our experience as kids and growing up, and even today as adults, we know that words do hurt. And criticism can cut into us deeply. And sometimes we can view the taunts as threats, and then they scare us. Every time somebody called me a pansy in school, I knew that they had figured out that I was different. And I just knew that I was going to get beat up after school someday. And when I got into high school, it was particularly traumatic because I was now self-aware enough to know that I was different. I like boys and not girls. And there was one older boy in band class that just made my life a living hell. Every day he called me a sissy, or worse. For some reason he hated me. And you know what? Because of his words and actions, the feeling was mutual. It was more like sticks and stones will break my bones, and words just sting like hell. Being called a fatty, or a dork, or a sissy, or stupid, or lazy, or ugly as a kid often manifests itself later in life as perhaps an eating disorder, or self-esteem problems, or heaven forbid, suicide. We are humiliated, or our reputations get built on these hurtful remarks, or we are shunned from social activities and friendships. Whether kids taunt without realizing it, or whether they do it on purpose, the kid that is usually the target suffers the most. And you know what? We often continue that behavior as adults. I read that the former president of the Good Samaritan Society once remarked that the tongue is the most powerful muscle in the body. In a single moment, it can destroy a person's reputation or demolish their sense of worth. Think about it. Have you ever used a taunt or hurtful words against someone you didn't like or thought was different? How did it make you feel, both as you said it and then afterwards? How do you think that person may have felt when they heard what you said? And thinking back, like I have in doing this sermon, has anyone ever taunted you in the past? If so, then you probably know how it feels. Nowadays, this is usually what we term bullying. And we have a lot of teachers and parents and adults helping kids, and even other adults, to stand up to bullying and abuse and hateful words and actions. Those helpers weren't around so much when I was a kid, or perhaps when you were younger. Yet even today, we still have a large proportion of the GLBTQIA+, whatever letter you want to use, youth, who commit suicide because taunts and bullying still exist and take its toll. Obviously, sticks and stones are still being thrown around today. I guess it's a part of human behavior or human nature. But now that we are older and recognize what being Christian is all about, we know that Jesus has shown us something different, a different way to behave. So let's take a closer look at today's scripture. Jesus was teaching early one morning in the synagogue when the Pharisees brought in a woman who had been caught committing adultery. Imagine, right in the middle of worship, they dragged this woman right in and to the sanctuary and put her on trial. Master, they said to Jesus, this woman was caught in the very act of sleeping with a man who is not her husband. The law teaches that a woman such as this must be stoned to death. What do you say? Just what kind of words do you think those congregants or onlookers or members in the synagogue were using about her? Slut, maybe? Whore? Trash? A woman such as this must be stoned to death. And how must that woman have felt to hear those things? Although it wasn't innuendo, it still must have been hurtful and humiliating. You know, my guess is that they probably didn't need to stone her to death because they were stoning her in a very different way. There, in the church, in front of her community, and in the presence of Jesus, their words were already causing her a slow, painful, and humiliating death, so to speak. You know, it's been said that religious people are the only army who ever shoot their wounded. And that's just what we see in the crowd's behavior here. The crowd picks up their stones of judgment, their eyes gawk at the woman such as this. But one person there, One person there refused to pick up a stone or to stare. Jesus refused to stare. He refused to add to the woman's humiliation. Jesus refused to condemn her, though really he was truly the only one who was gathered there that was qualified to do so. Here's my judgment, Jesus announced to the self-righteous crowd. Whoever has never sinned, you may cast the first stone. Go ahead. If you're perfect, cast your stones. If your life is without sin, start stoning. Now, you know there's a joke out there on the internet that I read online that says that right after Jesus said that, a stone comes whizzing over his head and hits the woman. And Jesus looks around at the crowd to see where the stone came from, puts his hands on his hips and says, "Mom, put down those stones." It's no coincidence that the elders or the Pharisees were the first to leave the synagogue after Jesus said that. I guess something about getting older makes us more aware of our shortcomings and perhaps more honest about our own failures. Pretty soon, though, even the youngest, most zealous of the Pharisees dropped their stones at Jesus' feet and left the temple. Yes, according to the rules, the law, this woman deserved to die. She was, after all, caught in the act of adultery. However, this time, compassion won out. This time, love was more powerful than justice. "Is there no one left to condemn you?" Jesus asked. "No," replied the woman. "Then neither do I condemn you," said Jesus. "Go and sin no more." So what if we had a similar story to tell today? We certainly all know people who commit adultery, or lie, or cheat, or steal, or hurt others. How would we, or other Christians, act today? Does pious speech and self-righteous attitudes separate us from other sinners? Does this allow us, or any other Christians for that matter, to pick up stones and aim them at anyone who does not believe, or think, or act, or speak the way we do? You know, literally, the word Pharisees means people who have separated themselves. And don't we all act like that, at least occasionally? Act a little separated from everybody else who sins? Don't we take pride in the fact that we're not like those who steal or cheat? That we are not like those who are addicted, or those who can't make their marriage work, or those who have children or family members who are always on the wrong side of the law? Of course we do. And so do many, many others who call themselves Christians. We believe that we are better than all other sinners. We don't do what those other sinners do, so we have the right to cast both sticks and stones. But you know, that's where Jesus set the Pharisees and sets us right. Jesus sets all of us right. He didn't say that the sinner was innocent, but he did imply that all sinners deserve compassion and not wrath from the rest of us. And we, as sinners, deserve that same compassion from others, from Jesus, from God. As Christians, we readily admit that Jesus was right, that sinners deserve compassion and a second chance. Yet we still act so harshly critical of people who make mistakes and break the rules. Perhaps we agree with Jesus to absolve the woman of 2,000 years ago of her adultery, but we have a really tough time of forgiving people today. We often carry on the Pharisees' tradition of judgment and scorn and punishment. And we have those stones and those words ready to fly, along with our attitude of self-righteousness. We are rigid, unbending, self-pious, and hypocritical, and just plain wrong in how we have treated others who have sinned. But the good news is that Jesus has shown us another way, and Lent is a perfect time to recognize that. Jesus has shown us the way of compassion. Jesus has shown us the way of love. the way of recognizing how we may have hurt others in the past by our words and our stones, and that perhaps we continue to stone others today. Jesus has shown us that we can lay these sticks and these stones at the foot of the cross, along with the rest of our sins. That's exactly what I'm going to do here with my stone. At the foot of the cross. Jesus has shown us that we can be given a second chance, a third chance, a zillionth chance at starting anew and sin-free. Jesus shows us compassion, and through God's grace we are forgiven of our sins to start anew, each and every day. That means that we need to take those stones that you symbolically have. If you picked one up from the back, you have it with you, and give them back to God by laying them either at the foot of the cross or at the altar today. Of course, if you're like Jesus' mother and truly without sin, feel free to take that stone home with you today. But like the Pharisees, I think you'll find that the real place for your stones are at the foot of the cross. So as we leave from the sanctuary later today, hear the words of Jesus when he tells us, "Then neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." And know that you'll always have a second chance at starting life anew. Amen.
Amen.